Canada is absolutely the leader in being concerned about the human condition of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and is concerned about treating folks who have this condition appropriately as people with various levels of disability. And we are concerned about multiple kinds of prevention activities to decrease the occurrence of the condition. Canada is absolutely concerned about it. And prevalence data would help us do those things better.
FASD stands for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. It's an umbrella term that comprises a range of developmental, physical, and neurobehavioral effects that are related to prenatal alcohol exposure. So FASD affects the way an individual's brain functions and therefore affects their behavior as well. It affects their learning, their memory, it affects their language, and it has a lot of effects on their behavior. It really affects their ability to understand and function in the community, and it can be very challenging for families. It can't be cured. Unfortunately, it's a disorder that is lifelong. It's a lifelong disability. We can, however, help an individual deal with the effects of prenatal alcohol exposure. The earlier, the better. So the sooner that we can put in early intervention, the better for that individual and their family. But it is a lifelong disability.
It's far more complex than simply telling people, don't drink. If it were that simple, we'd have the problem solved.
If we think about why women are drinking during pregnancy, research will tell us that it's most commonly due to using alcohol to cope with past traumas, being a victim of domestic violence, sexual abuse, child abuse, and that kind of situation crosses all socioeconomic status groups, whether you're rich or whether you're poor.
Nobody drinks to harm their child. I've never met anybody whose goal was to harm their child through drinking. But I have met an awful lot of people whose drinking behavior has harmed their child accidentally, because they didn't know they were pregnant, because they were suffering from an addiction, because they weren't aware that just going out a few times and partying could do it. They didn't know.
Well, first of all, everybody assumes the data exists. I don't know why. People just assume that if you asked what the prevalence is, we would know. Because if you ask what the prevalence of acne or asthma or heart disease is, we know. So why wouldn't we know the prevalence of this? And that's actually, I think, one of our biggest barriers is the assumption that it's known or should be easily obtained. When in fact the learning has been over the last 40 years that it's anything but easy to obtain. The way fetal alcohol is diagnosed is more difficult than most disorders. The hallmark feature is diffuse brain damage, which is detected clinically through a broad set of psychometric tests. And those tests are done by a team of folks, psychologists, speech pathologists, and occupational therapists, and physicians and others who are not only looking at the possibility that alcohol did the disruption to the brain, but that nothing else did it.
Determining FASD prevalence is complicated. Diagnosis is expensive and resource intensive. Diagnostic capacity is not available in all areas, and families are often reluctant to come forward because of stigma.
There are 13 different social welfare systems. There are 13 different educational and correctional systems across this country. And to bring them all together to agree in common purpose quite often is difficult for a variety of reasons that don't have anything to do with a lack of goodwill. Everyone wants to solve this problem, but everyone has their own priorities. Everyone has their own budget limitations.
As a family, knowing prevalence on my family specifically helps me to explain to my children that they are not somehow an isolated thing that happened, that what happened to them and the disability that they have is common. And it's not a reflection on them, it's something that happens.
I think that FASD is a significant issue for public policy makers from two standpoints. The first is one of cost. Where will governments put their dollars into social intervention strategies? It's impossible to really have a good understanding of the impact of expenditures if there's no sense of the dimensions of the problem. The second aspect of it is that FASD has not as yet fully entered the public consciousness as a serious problem, precisely because it is so submerged in the population.
The current cost of FASD in Canada is $7.6 billion annually. We all go to school, we all use health services, etc. So we all cost something to the society. The question is, what is the extra cost for FASD? The extra cost for each case of FASD during lifetime is $800,000, which means that every case prevented from FASD will generate an immediate net benefit to the government of $800,000 for each and every one.
One of the things that I think gets in the way and the sticking points is cost. And people say, well, we're not going to fund that. But you already are funding it. It's only a question about which pocket in the suit jacket it's coming out of. In the end, the taxpayer is funding it.
The preliminary calculation we did quite recently show that the return of investment is very, very high. It's unusually high in the field of FASD. What we found that an investment of $150,000 in prevention would yield at least $1.5 million in return. Only Apple and Facebook and companies like that can show a higher rate of return than investment in prevention of FASD.
I think it's really important to understand where there may be higher prevalences of FASD, where there are more people at risk for FASD, in order that we can target not only diagnostic programs, but we can target intervention resources and support resources for families. And the only way we can do that is really understanding what the numbers are in different areas. We really believe that early intervention is very important for children. Early intervention, even in the preschool stage or in infancy, allows for that understanding of behavior. It allows families to anticipate behavior sometimes. It allows us to put in therapy supports or behavioral supports for that child so that their behavior can be better understood and managed early on. I think there's a lot of different prevention strategies that we could be thinking about that are at all different levels, whether we're looking at preventing alcohol use in general, whether we're looking at specific groups and alcohol use. So I think we could really look at using those numbers to help us in that.
Watching the rate or change in prevalence over time is our report card as professionals. Is prevalence declining? That would mean our prevention efforts are effective. Are people who have this condition being served well by government systems and by other interested parties? Again, we would know that by seeing how many people are being served and what the prevalence actually is. Without prevalence, we really have very little ability to tell people we're doing a good job.
What we really need, I think, is a broader national strategy that looks overall at regions as well as nationally to determine what that prevalence is. And we might be targeting some specific groups. We might look at what the prevalence is in some rural areas or in foster care areas, in criminal justice areas, just to name a few, because we know that from some of the existing work that's where there can be some of the areas of highest prevalence.
In order to actively work on prevalence, there are only 2 or 3 strategies. One would be to increase the diagnostic capacity across Canada. The second would be to strategically pick certain communities and sites across what you think might be high-risk regions or low-risk regions and typical regions, and insert diagnostic clinics into those sites so that one could sample actively. The third possibility would be to look at broad populations for subpieces of fetal alcohol as an indirect marker of its prevalence. Those are called searching for sentinel findings. The next thing you'll need is a data management system that allows this data to be brought together across provincial and territorial borders so that we would have a federal view of what the data was telling us. At this point, we need numbers of people at the federal level and at the provincial level to work together to pick a strategy, fund a strategy, and then to make all the various people who would need to work together agree to work together in order to establish these kinds of numbers over time.
I know that ministers are continuing to raise the issue on a national basis, and it's my hope, it's my expectation that it will come together.
Those affected by FASD in the community bring us a gift. They point out to us that alcohol is an issue in our community and we need to be addressing it. Because it affects children, it makes more people aware and more passionate about the issue.
There is promise, there is hope, and therefore the foundation for moving forward with these kinds of projects will be to establish the prevalence of this problem, and that's what we're doing here.
When I knew I was going to be doing this, I talked to a couple of my adult children about this and explained to them what I was doing. And my daughter, who's 28, said to me, "You mean they don't know how many people have FAS?" And I said, "No, they don't." And she said, "Why? Don't we count?" And I think that's a very telling statement. And it reminds me of that old expression that says, what isn't counted doesn't count. My children and my adult children with FASD matter. They are important and they matter. They matter to me and they matter to the world in which they live. And they have a lot to give.